Thank First and foremost, our apologies for being a little tardy. We've had a very full closed session meeting. And I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome all of you for being here. And I'll reach out to Michelle Rushton to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you could. Come on up to the podium and kick us off.
Okay.
Surprise.
Hi, everyone. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So you're not completely surprised, Michelle. We usually call on a child, but I could pronounce your name, so I knew I could pick that one. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Moved, second, whatever.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Report out of closed session. There was none. I'm just confirming that. And I need to let everyone know who's filled out a pink card identifying 8.1. What you actually want to speak to is 11.2. 8.1 is just a presentation. So when we get over to the discussion action items, I'll call on everyone then. So you're aware of that. Staff presentation and information. Presentation regarding the advisory committee report and its next steps. Dr. Stowe.
Thank you, Mr. Wormers, members of the board. As you know, for the better part of the last 9 months, actually since last October, we've had 7-11 committee meetings on surplus property at Hamilton Adult School. And we have a few members. We have 8 members on that committee that served for the 6 meetings that we had. And it was quite an effort. And so we do have 3 of those members here tonight. And so I'd like to recognize Jess Negretti, Marianne Hamada, and the chairperson, Nanette Nolan, who served their community duty and really looked at the issues very hard and struggled with everything that was brought up. And so I would like to thank them personally for their service, and as well as the 5 other members who aren't in attendance. For the presentation itself, I would like to call up Andreas Schaltes with Atkinson, Andelson, Lawyer, Rudin, Romo. He was our attorney that worked with us and myself and the committee through the process to guide us and to provide the structure for us to be able to then have the committee make a recommendation to the board. And so to go over the report that was put together, Mr. Schaltes is here. So Andreas.
Very good, thank you. Let me I think I went the wrong direction here. Oh, sorry about that, apologize. Thank you. President Wormers and members of the board, administration, and those in the audience. Thank you for having me. I think last time I addressed the board, it was May of last year, so it's been quite a chunk of time. We then, of course, convened as an advisory committee. We just heard about that. That went on through October of last year through just now until the end of April. So 6 meetings in general, and took some time and a lot of input, and you're going to hear about that tonight. I'm going to go over this update regarding the advisory committee process itself and the final report and recommendation, which is a good 40-something pages or so that you've got before you. Includes as exhibits all of the comments and minutes, if you will, all of the minutes from each of the 6 meetings, so you can get a real flavor for what occurred. I know many were tracking and seeing things online and whatnot, but definitely gives you a real flavor for what occurred for those 6 particular meetings. We're going to talk a little bit about the proposed action before you tonight. Action was really guided towards having your options available to you. Nothing's written in stone for you yet. You're going to have a lot of information over a course of many months. And then possible next steps in general. Again, we're going to touch on things and keep things open-ended for you. 6 committee meetings, you'll see there the dates. October 10th was when we started things off. That was actually a pretty big meeting when it comes to the information role, kind of more of me talking than some of the other meetings. We talked about the Brown Act. These are Brown Act meetings, all open session meetings, all noticed, etc. talked about conflict of interests, and just like you all, this is a committee that's a legislative extension of you, this legislative body. So as an extension of you, they have to follow the same rules, and we kind of lay the groundwork and talk about all those sorts of things. And then talk a lot about surplus property. What is it? What do you do if you're selling or leasing or exchanging? All of those things, we actually supplied a lot of information to the committee members and had people in attendance, and a handful of people did speak. Then in November, got together again, and there you had the director of the Adult Center on campus there provide a PowerPoint presentation and really covered a lot of information, talked about the programs, both adult ed and the special education transition, as well as the community uses, both Little League and softball leagues that are there. Then January 8th, had a very long meeting. That was a noticed public hearing meeting, so not just your Brown Act notice, but actually telling others we will have a public hearing. While at each meeting people can speak, here people did come out in big number, certainly well over 100, maybe even 2 attended, 37 spoke, heard a lot about the property. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And then February 15th started to really hone in on what a report might look like. April 4th, more of that, and April 25th, more of that. And we had public speakers at each of those. That all culminated in a final vote on April 25th of the actual report. It came down, the recommendation before you, which we'll talk about shortly, came down, it's a 5-2-1, so it's 5 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 abstention. The board does have to accept a report. It's mandatory under the law that we convene a committee like that, and you do accept a report, but that's pretty much it. From that point forward, you do have, you get to follow your druthers, your will. You get to decide whether or not you want to proceed with the property disposition, if at all. You want to decide also if it's sale or lease, of course guided by those recommendations, but you can choose another path, so we'll talk about that. The advisory committee, real quick, we talked about this long ago when we convened them, but this is a sort of cross-section of the community made up of a socioeconomic background person, a person that has some business experience, landowners, renters, parents, and teachers, administrators, things of that nature. Again, Brown Act, conflict of interest, all of that we followed and ultimately came up with a recommendation for you now. Their purposes and duties, if you will. Real big ticket item is to review the enrollment projections, whether or not you need property, and if you don't, why. And so we did take a look at that. We circulated what we call a priority use list that evolved over time. That first use list said, hey, maybe sell the property, then lease it, or leave it as is. Ultimately, the recommendation flip-flop that, said leave it as is, but in the event that you are going to proceed with surplus property procedures, go with lease as opposed to sale. I'm going to talk about that on another slide coming up, but that's that use list that we circulate and gets people thinking and talking, showing up and having a conversation with the committee about that. Hold public hearings, which we did, and ultimately determine the tolerance the community has for uses of the property and put that in a final report and recommendation. In this report, we're going to, you'll see, I think you all have it, and I know you've kind of followed this as you went online, but you've had it all officially to you as of last Thursday per the Brown Act. It is an overview of the property in general, overview of the enrollment projections and the fact that we have capacity here at this district. Talks a little bit about the current uses of the properties and some alternative uses, assesses the property value, had a appraisal done. It's about a year old now. That appraisal showed up at $33.5 million. Assumes some changes, of course, to its existing zoning rather than public use. It assumes that you'll have some commercial and residential development. If you got more units there, if this were developed by a developer and had more units, more density, we call it, more units per acre, you'd actually see a higher value than that most likely. And then fewer would be less than. But it's just a dart throw, if you will, at a potential assessment of value. And then, of course, there's a real good, I think, summary of the public comments, the community input in the document. We talk about each of the 6 meetings, but then actually have a section in the report to you that breaks down by each of the 6 the actual public comments and summarizes those. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. Overview of property. Hamilton Education Center, it's 2 different parcels that together is 10.265 acres, so it's a nice chunky piece of property in terms of development. Harder to develop very small parcels. This is not a very small parcel, so I think that you would certainly have interest in it from the development community out there. Currently zoned public use, can't do too much with it other than governmental buildings, sumps, landfills, things of that nature. If it were to be developed, somebody would be going through the city and planning commission process to change the zoning. That would be a mandatory function in order to get it developed, and that's why it's assumed in a highest and best use appraised value. We didn't appraise it based on it just being a governmental building. So multifamily residential would probably yield the highest and best dollars. Question is, how many units could you get out there? That remains to be seen. That's something a developer and the city would have a lot to say about. And of course, the community and even the district. So there'll be a lot more into the future on that should this continue. So took a look at the enrollment data. The enrollment data shows a decrease and an expected continued decrease through 2026. Got one more slide for you in just a moment. The district does have school sites. Should it have a peak and should it have a blip that you could house the students at. So there is existing capacity. And number 3 here, information does not suggest that the district must acquire new property or maintain current real property to accommodate students. That is, if you need to put students elsewhere, you can do that. And we have a slide here. This comes from Decision Insight. Decision Insight is one of a handful of consultants that look at demographics and look at a host of information that to me is mind-boggling and comes up with, I think, a very accurate look at where your projections may play out over time. When I say difficult, it's difficult. I've seen them in action and over the years, and I've certainly got nothing in it for me. They are not part of my company, but I've watched them come in at 1% to 2% error, which is, I think, astounding given the amount of information that they look at and how far they project out. Here you will see, if you don't, it's a little small, I apologize, it's not bold or anything, it was just taken from one of the documents. 2018, right there in the middle, on the blue line, if you drop all the way down, your open seats are currently 2,455. Play that out to 2026, which is what this particular study looked at, you're at 3,160. So the trend is growing that you're going to have more seats, not fewer seats. So that's, I think, an important piece to the puzzle and something that by law the committee has to look at. Also, like I mentioned before, had your director, is it DeJulio? Yes, I always get that name, I apologize. He was good enough to provide a PowerPoint presentation and talk a lot about what was going on there at the Hamilton Adult Ed Center. Talked about different pots of money, how things are funded, whole host of things. This is just one slide of many, just showing how many students are involved in that enrollment for adult schools throughout the district. They can be moved elsewhere. We've had that discussion many times during the 6 meetings. So yeah, we looked at a description of the programs themselves, the composition of the adult students, both district and students coming from outside of the district, or adults, I should say, coming from outside of the district. Looked at operational expenses. It was interesting to see that. I don't see that in my walk of work here too often, but the director was good enough to provide that information and those sources of funds, et cetera. And talked about district uses for the Hamilton site of interest, other entities that might be interested in the property, what that could look like. Smaller uses, existing buildings being used through a license agreement, the types of things you can do legally, but certainly wouldn't drive big numbers like a development would with a ground lease ongoing revenue type stream. So apples and oranges completely, but we talked about that and certainly spent a lot of time hearing from the community and talking about the current uses outside of the adult ed and outside of the special ed transition. While we heard about those, and the programs going on in both of those arenas, we also heard about the community use, both softball and Little League of the Fields, and how it's coveted. There's no question that this community likes those fields and sees this as a gem in North Torrance. So I wanted you to get a feeling for that, and the report shares that sentiment, certainly. Discussed alternative uses. I think I touched on that a little just now in terms of what entities might be able to license property or use existing space rather than knocking down and building out, for example, multifamily residential. There could be the relocation of students. Went back. Could be the relocation of students, and we're going to show you a slide in a minute that talks about what surplus property is. It really assumes, in this instance, the relocation of these programs. You would not be able to call this surplus if you didn't do something with the existing programs, because it is being used. So the question is it being used to its fullest value, or could you move those programs and uses elsewhere and do something different with the property? Talked about alternatives for the field use. A developer looking at those fields is going to want to develop that space. It's a lot of acreage, and that's going to be something that they're interested in. It could very well be that any development would have some continued field use. It remains to be seen how much of that acreage would be in play, but a developer would be likely expected to have either a cash contribution or field space contribution to the city and any entitlement package that it were to proceed with and get through the Planning Commission and the public comment process and whatnot. Also talked a little bit about splitting the site. Not to any huge degree, because we're not appraisers and it's really hard, and we're not developers. It's very hard to get a feel for, hey, you take 10.265 acres and you develop it separately or in chunks, or retain some and develop some. What does that do to the overall development? As you can imagine, when you're dealing with ingress and egress and parking and environmental concerns and city zoning, you have to figure out what can you build on what space you have. So at 10.265, you have a fair amount of options, obviously. As it gets smaller and smaller, you have fewer options as what you could build and still have it pencil out for a developer. A developer is going to have to do infrastructure and traffic concerns and address a number of things. And as the smaller the field space or building space, more and more of it gets eaten up, if you will. When I say eaten up, doesn't get developed into a new plan or a new project, you're going to have less return on dollars, certainly. But that said, it's possible. You could always dispose of less acreage, not the full acreage. So that was discussed. Again, going back to the older appraisal report now, it's $33.5 million. The market has held strong, certainly hasn't skyrocketed since then, but certainly hasn't really declined. And this really is a stab in the dark. This was assuming commercial and some residential, both low and medium density, maybe a smattering of higher density in certain areas, but in general, you wouldn't be netting a full multifamily type development at this price. If you were to get a developer to come in and get 8 or 9 or even 10 acres developed, full multifamily would be a higher number than what was in our appraisal report. And when I say we, that was your appraiser, not me in my office, just one that we had conducted. Important to kind of get a sense of who all showed up, not who all, but the numbers. I think that's always nice to see. I've had a number, I'll tell you, of advisory committees over the years. I've conducted dispositions, leases, sales, and otherwise for school districts for 15 plus years. This was a big one, not unlike a few. This was one where people do care and they came out and they wanted to speak. In the first meeting, we had 3 speakers. November, we had 3. In January, the public hearing, had 37. February 15, April, the beginning was 12, and then the second meeting was 11. Certainly, some of those were the same speaker, so redundant in the sense that the individual, but not necessarily in their message. Some switched up the message when they spoke multiple times. Others were a little bit more in a theme, but a lot of input. And you have, again, in your report, and I always recommend just referring back to that over the course of time just to get a feel for it, you'll get a sense of what everybody had to say. There were nobody really showing up to discuss keeping the property, not proceeding. There were those basically saying, back up. They were there to say don't proceed. There weren't people showing up to say, you know what, this is a great idea, go get a bunch of money. I've heard that sentiment before and after the meetings, but certainly not in the meeting where people take their 3 minutes. The 3 minutes were those showing up, making clear that they felt that they had a North Torrance asset, something near and dear to them that was in North Torrance. It was suited for them in North Torrance, something they could point to, use. It was a resource, both educational and recreational. And so you heard a lot of that, and again, all of that is in your report. Also, I think important to point out that this topic has been brought up in this venue, not just at the advisory committee, but this board has heard at your board meetings from a number of people, some, I'm assuming, the same individuals. Going just back to even September, you'll see there 5, 9, 7, 7, 3, 7, blah, blah, blah. You'll note that that spans from September of 2017 through June of 2018, and I'm guessing, since I heard somebody say something about cards, you'll hear a little bit more tonight even. So you've had public speakers in on this process at this level as well, not just the committee level. So I think everybody does know what we've been talking about. In the final report, it does essentially these handful of things. It discusses this committee process that we followed. It reviews the property, of course, summarizes each of the meetings, describes the public input, like I told you before, per 6 meeting, what was said, what the sentiment was, if you will. Summarizes the information considered by the committee. That's part of the report we heard from the director. That's information with respect to demographics and enrollment projections and whatnot, the appraisal, all sorts of things. And then ultimately gives you a final recommendation. I think an important part of this process was the definition of surplus. I think there was some concern, is it surplus if it's being used and enjoying the use of it, if you will? The answer is, well, this is the definition of surplus by law. It's surplus property includes any property which is not or will not be needed by the district for school classroom buildings at the time of delivery, title, or possession. It goes to classroom purposes. It goes to educational support. It doesn't go to just recreation, which is a city function more than a school district function. Many districts, of course, will supplement and do what they can when it comes to recreation, but this definition goes squarely to your educational function. But besides that, I think more importantly, it goes to the issue of, is it being used? It's property which is not or will not be needed, by the district for school classroom buildings at the time of delivery of title or possession. So here you can, by the time you sell the property or deliver it to somebody under a lease arrangement, if those functions that you have there, those programs and those uses have been relocated, it's still surplus property. It's not deemed not surplus property just because it's actively being used, which makes sense. We have a lot of K through 12s that have, for example, elementary schools, which are still elementary schools while we're having this conversation, closed for the purposes of consolidation or other, and then disposed of over time. So it's surplus property, even though it's currently being used as a K through 12 or an elementary school, for example. That was the determination made by this board. You'll see there was one motion by one member of the 8-person committee to say, hey, this is not surplus. That was not seconded. So it stopped there and really turned to more of a look at, okay, it's surplus, but then what? So the next recommendation was keep this property as is. Keep the uses as is. Next, if the district should take action to follow a surplus property procedure, then it's going to take action necessary to relocate those programs and activities conducted on the property and pursue ground lease. So this is kind of a loaded recommendation to a certain extent. There's a lot there. It's saying, okay, keep it as is. That's a recommendation. But in the event that you do follow the process and you're looking to drive an income, et cetera, and lease or sale or otherwise, they're suggesting, number one, lease it as opposed to sell. By leasing it, you're going to get an ongoing revenue stream, so an income source over time versus one-time money through the sale of the property. And it also says, hey, relocate the programs. Makes sense. You've got existing programs there. You're going to have to relocate or do away with or do something with the programs that are there now. And to relocate, for example, your adult ed to another site and special ed transition to another site or 2 sites. You can split those up if you wanted. And then the ball field space. Nothing in the law says that you have to relocate, for example, the Little League or softball leagues, but there's been discussion for a long while now that would be still in the works and something that would be of merit. We discussed at this committee process level a lot about that and about options. And I think a lot of people want to know exactly what that looks like and when. And it's really hard to hammer that down. No way is that evasive or hiding the ball. That's to say, so much more will come. And if you choose to move forward with a ground lease scenario for that recommendation versus sale, you're going to have developers who are going to come to the table and tell you what they think they can ultimately develop on that site and what they're willing to pay and for how long they're willing to pay. And it's at that time in those negotiations that the district can say, well, we are looking to relocate adult ed and special ed transition. And if you're looking to relocate your ball fields, both Little League and Softball League, you can put that onus on the developer to pay for that relocation. Sure, it'll come out of you. Anything that the developer's paying will ultimately change the price they can pay you in rent. But it's a part and parcel of what they're going to do. They're going to follow an environmental document, a full zone change with the city, and we'd be happy to tell them also relocate, do design, and figure out where these programs will ultimately be within the district. So it's very hard to tell anybody at these committee levels what's going to exactly happen and where, but that's one of many reasons why that's the case. It's just a lot of the details when you get to the meat of a negotiated deal. Fourth thing out of this report, it's should the board seek to lease the property, relocate these programs in Littlefields? I just melded that into the third one, I apologize. So should have jumped ahead to this slide, but make sure you relocate. That was in the recommendation specifically. It fits with the definition, it makes good sense. And then lastly, pursue the waiver of the bid process. So if you remember back to May of last year, and I know you've seen some summaries from me in the past as well, and there's been things online through this committee process, and I think the summary that my firm puts out with regard to surplus property procedures is like 31 pages long. So it's hard to really call it a summary, but the law tells you what to do and how to do it. When you're disposing of a piece of property, even through a ground lease scenario like this. You're not truly disposing of it, you're just letting it be developed and used. Through that ground lease, the default is that you're going to do what we call the traditional process, or bid auction process. We've set up for you tonight the ability to follow that and/or the waiver process. So assuming you do take action to do something rather than leave it as is, you can of course leave it as is. You can of course move forward with the traditional or with the waiver. The waiver, I think, is the way to go. I think the committee thought so too after hearing from me and others on that subject. The traditional, bouncing back to that, the default, if you will, is you send out a bunch of information to anybody who might be interested in bidding on the property. You tell them when you're going to open those bids, and you conduct an auction. You open and declare out loud what you've received in writing, then you call for oral bids, and you literally sit there and do a bid auction. And sometimes nobody's that interested, and other times you sit there for an hour and a half and watch it ping pong back and forth, and the price goes up, and it's actually quite exciting stuff. Good and competitive. It's nice. Really great for sales. If you're selling a piece of property and you know this is the price and these are the escrow terms, deposit and close of escrow date, easy. When doing a ground lease, really hard, because now when I put out into the community or the district sends out a bid package, that somebody's going to come forward and give you a price based on this document, right? Instead of a purchase agreement, you're doing a ground lease here. And if you're doing the lease, you're going to have an option agreement and a really thick ground lease document. And it's going to talk about everything from base rent to how that rent increases and the speed upon which it increases, to set-asides of dollars long-term so that when you're 50 years out, you're going to be able to maintain that building, or the developer will maintain it, so that if you get 70 years out or whatever the length of the term is, you know the asset you get back is going to be in good repair. It's going to have all sorts of details in it, and it's a large document. So when we do a bid auction in those scenarios, the trouble is nobody can really give you a price to compare it to the next price, because they're giving you a price with all these changes to an agreement. So they're all willy-nilly counteroffers. It's no, this for this deal and this price is higher for the same deal. It's all different deals. So we like the waiver process, and we've done these regularly throughout the state. This is where you go to the State Board of Education, ask them to waive this process, which they're happy to do. And we send out a request for proposal, similar to that bid package, but not the nitty-gritty of all these documents. Just basically, here's what we're looking for, bullet points, big ticket items. You'll get back 2 and 3 pages of proposals from hopefully a dozen or more developers who will tell you what they want to develop on that site. You get to see those in open session, discuss those, ultimately give us direction to talk to the highest 2 or 3 or whichever you like best. Rather than the auction where it's the highest wins, you get to negotiate with these waiver proposals. Those that propose, you get to go back and say, I like what you're proposing. I think this has legs. I think the city will support this type of a development, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately what you choose is the most beneficial deal, not just the highest grossing dollar deal. So for a lot of reasons, waiver makes good sense, and that's why we had the committee take a look at that, and they agreed to put it in their recommendation. They wanted to, because they don't have to reconvene. If 6 months from now you chose to do a waiver, you'd have to reconvene a committee just to talk about the waiver, so we did it in all one fell swoop. So proposed action, and I say that in joking aside, I'm sure they would be happy to convene. It's just a lot of work, and I was quite impressed with the level of detail and sheer amount of energy and time put into this. It was not an easy road. You can get it done legally in 3. They took 6, so that gives you a sense of it. Today's proposed board action. You will have a couple things in front of you tonight. One is, of course, to, by way of resolution, have you accept this report. Accepting it doesn't mean you're following it by the letter of the law. It's not something you have to follow whole cloth, but it's certainly something you can accept and review. 2, declare the property surplus. That's part of the recommendation. 3, declare your intent to seek the lease of the property. 4, authorize the traditional process. 5, authorize the waiver, State Board of Ed waiver, that is. And then later, if you decide down the road to go down one road or the other, we can come back to you with more information. Our goal here is to say, hey, give administration and your consultants the ability to see what the development community thinks. You may hear in the future, it doesn't have legs, it's not going to pencil, it doesn't make sense to do X, Y, and Z at this particular property. Or you're going to hear, no, this property is prime for development, and here's the type of values that we're talking about, the type of density, the type of units, commercial versus residential, multifamily versus single family, etc. So much more information will come to you. What we had in mind tonight is just to take and accept this recommendation and bring it forward to where you don't have your hands tied. You can choose to do nothing with the property later. You can choose to hear information through a bid process if we get that far, or through a waiver process, and give consultants and administration the ability to kind of meander through waiver or traditional traditional bid. I think we'll start with waiver, frankly, because I think that makes good sense if we're following the ground lease. But this just puts it all in one place, so we're not continuously bugging you on the semantics of the education code. We've followed the rules, we've done it. We'll come back to you for not only your guidance, but any approval. So nothing here is putting anything in stone. You still have carte blanche to follow your druthers. Bid hearing. Tonight, I already talked about this a little bit, but you're approving two concurrent paths. One's traditional bid, the other's the waiver, like I mentioned. Just to give you a sense of the bid hearing, you still have to send out notices, including Naylor Act notices, which is telling the world you've got open space that's been used as open space. It gives an opportunity for the city or county, Park and Recs, to buy a portion, 30%, of the property at a reduced value, 25 cents on the dollar. 30% of the land, 25 cents on the dollar roughly, versus fair market value for the remaining 70% of the land. So we send out those notices. That can take 150 days, usually not as long. 60 days notices, if there's an interest, it's 90 more days to negotiate in good faith. There's other notices we send out, another pecking order rights. We notice the bid hearing, we open those bids, we declare them out loud, and we do an counteroffer, an oral bidding, and then see if we have true offers or counters. Counteroffers being, hey, we don't like what you put in the bid package, we don't like your terms, so here's a bunch of terms. Those sometimes you'll get in a sales scenario, but you will always get them in the waiver, the long-term ground lease scenario because of the real magnitude of the documents and how difficult they are. That's why the waiver process should be followed, to really get a negotiation perspective rather than just the high bid, really have a give and take. Waiver uses that RFP that I told you about. You can waive pretty much all of their surplus property procedures. One is just one pecking order right where we have to send out notices at fair market value. You got to do that no matter what. And the other is the use of proceeds. Less important to you here, probably, if you follow ground lease, your proceeds aren't restricted. You get to use them for your general fund or wherever you direct them by way of resolution. If you were to sell the property, the dollars, the proceeds you get from that sale would be restricted. Capital improvement, capital outlay, deferred maintenance that won't reoccur in a 5-year period. Big ticket items, brick and mortar. Okay? So the law says, hey, you can't waive that. If you were to sell this, even through a waiver, you can't decide to stick it in your general fund. Okay? Here again, if you follow ground lease, you do have much more flexibility. It's not restricted money. You need to consult with your collective bargaining units and advisory committee. Here, we've already done the advisory committee, so you checked that box already. But you still have to talk with your collective bargaining units. Just let them know what you're doing. They just say yay or nay, and you check a box with the waiver office when you submit online. Conduct a public hearing, which is tonight. By law, you have to do that, so you need to hear from people on the function of waiver, question of waiver. That's agendized for you tonight. And then we'll submit a request if we're proceeding, and that usually takes a couple of meetings with the State Board of Ed. They meet every other month, so it takes a little while. Super easy, not costly at all. It's just an application, if you will. You will get the waiver. Haven't had one been unsuccessful. They'd have to show that there's some jeopardy, if you will, to your pupils. I don't see how they would show that. And there's some unofficial requirements that the waiver office builds into the law. They decided to follow this request for proposal process, make you give 30 to 60-day notices to the community of what the final deal would look like, etc. Short story there is, it's not under the law. You could tell the waiver office no, I'm guessing, but why? It's no big deal. It just helps with telling the world what we're doing, how we're doing it, and gives you some way to conduct it through an RFP is fine, might as well. We're going to conduct it somehow, so we follow them and get our waivers. Possible timelines here. We're going to submit an application. That would be probably the first step out of the gates, but then concurrently send out notices to let agencies know what we've got, both for the waiver and for the bid auction potentially. We send out that bid package. If we're going to be doing a hearing, we might stop short of that if we just decide to do an RFP. We'll see how this evolves over time in conversations with others. We will conduct that bid hearing or just receive the request for proposals. So again, two concurrent paths. Conduct a bid hearing if you're doing the bid, and if not, you got your request for proposals out. Proposals come back in hand. We open them up, put them in a spreadsheet, and come to you and say, here we go. They're all in a spreadsheet, 3 or 4 pages each. These are the terms, and this is how they compare, and get direction from you, both in closed and open session, to negotiate, refine, hone in on. Sometimes you get proposals that are too good to be true, and when you really talk with the developers, you realize that's not what they really intended in writing. They just wanted to get your attention. So our goal, of course, is to get you proposals that stick, that they're willing to sign. Had some done recently, had 4, which wasn't a huge number, but 4 great proposals come in on a really nice property, beach view, the whole bit. And those proposals came in strong. And of the couple of highest, they came in with really good hard money, deposit money up front. So just in a short 60 to 90 days, if the developer chooses to not proceed, the district's going to be looking at a 7-figure check just to go through the process. So we'll try to do what we can to bring in proposals that have some meat on the bone, that some money, hard deposit money in place, so we're not just looking at pie in the sky. Total timeline, you'll see there, 135 to 270 days. It's really the latter. It's, in a perfect world, you send out notices and you get right past it, but somebody's going to have an interest in a discussion, so it's going to slow it down there, et cetera, et cetera. Waiver office can conduct it in its first meeting or second. Long story short, assume the 270 days, I'm guessing, best guess. Summary, real quick, just to recap. After I quiet down here, and you'll hear, I think, another presentation, we're going to get to the public hearing portion of tonight, the first of which is the hearing regarding waiver. Straightforward. If anybody wants to speak regarding the waiver, they can do that. They've heard in the community a lot about that at the last 3 or 4 committee meetings, so I'm not sure what level of interest there is for the waiver in particular. And separate from that, the resolution. This will come at section 11 of your agenda tonight, 11.1. First item up is this resolution. Again, 5 things. It accepts your committee report, declares the property surplus, declares the intent to lease, offer to lease as opposed to sale, that is, and then bid and waiver are both on the table. So you've got all of it available to you. If you were to conduct an auction and or do an RFP waiver process and you don't like what you see, you just stop there. Nothing, even by putting out notices to the city and county and others, nothing forces your hand. You could always pull the plug if you don't like what you see in terms of values and the like. So I want to leave it on that note to make sure you all understand that the idea is to give you options, to give you information, to bring you information, and help round out and develop that rather than just pigeonhole and putting you right into a box. Questions and answers of me? Any at all? Okay, very good. Thank you for your attention.
Very much.
Moving, this is just staff presentation, we don't even vote on this, we wait till later. 8.2, Frontline Education, absence and substitute management presentation from Dr. Liberati.
Thank you, Mr. Wormers, members of the board. I don't have a PowerPoint.
Thank God.
Very briefly, regarding our absence and substitute management system. Some of you may recall back in 2007, we started researching a management system, and due to the fiscal crisis, that plan was set aside. In 2013-14, we started receiving some inquiries, both from classified staff and quite a few from certificated staff, regarding a substitute management system that would support and be more efficient regarding identifying appropriate substitutes to cover absences of our regular employees. So we researched about 26 school districts and found that out of the 26, 24 were actually using ASOP, which is now called Frontline after that purchase, and found that Frontline was probably the best system out there at the time. I think it still is now. We just completed our second year. We implemented it July 1, 2016, and gone quick. Completed our second year, and although we had some growing pains at the beginning trying to identify issues and tailor the system for Torrance Unified specifically, once we got through the 4th or 5th month, I think those kind of settled down, and it seems that the system's working as planned. It serves, with the system, we serve about 2,526 regular employees and about 866 substitutes, both classified and certificated. The cost is $26,400 for the system. It's an off-site system, which means Gil doesn't have to manage anything. All the hardware is off-site, so it's all managed completely by Frontline. The process, how it works quickly, a regular employee that's going to be absent due to an illness, not a vacation or something like that, but due to an illness, could actually create the absence at any point in time. That absence is then seen by qualified substitutes, and the qualified substitute can accept the absence. If a substitute does not accept the absence, the system actually starts making calls. Other than between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., we don't want to wake people up when they're going to bed or in bed. It'll make calls until somebody accepts the substitute assignment. I think what the system has done for us, it's allowed us to be more competitive with neighborhood districts that actually are competing for the same resource, that's qualified substitutes, and stay as efficient as possible. That's my update on the system.
Okay, thank you. Certainly. Mr. Steffen?
I know there's a statewide problem with adequate number of subs to cover absences. Have we noticed any change in the last couple of years about how many absences are not covered, or the times we were not, has it about the same, or has it increased or decreased?
We've noticed some improvement. The major issue always is the resource, that's the qualified substitutes.
Right.
We saw a significant decline as we worked through the fiscal crisis, 2010, 2011, fewer people coming into education or selecting teaching as a profession. We've seen an improvement there over the last couple of years, so fewer classes not being covered, so we're seeing an improvement. Hopefully that continues.
Okay, that was my question too, actually.
No questions from you? Okay. All right, moving on to the public hearing, 9.1, public hearing for notice of intent to request waiver from State Board of Education. The opening statement, this is a duly noticed public hearing under the Education Code Section 52103 for the notice of intent to request waiver from a State Board of Education of the competitive bidding procedures set forth in Education Code Section 17455, etc., and for the lease and/or ground lease development of district property located at 2606 West 182nd Street, Torrance, California. Any interested persons are now afforded an opportunity to be heard. Mr. Paulson.
Good evening, School Board, TUSD, Administration. I was a little confused on the timing when I'm supposed to speak, because I did want to speak on the other part where this is coming up, 11.1, I guess. But since we're afforded an opportunity on the waiver specifically, that was one of my questions. Just listened to the gentleman speak, and as some of you know very well, I'm a strong advocate for competitive bidding, because I think, generally speaking, you're going to get the best value for any asset through that process. So granted, I've been trying to follow this, and I just listened to him speak, and I wasn't clear on what the benefit of obtaining the waiver would be and bypassing the competitive bidding process for this. So I'm hoping maybe we can provide more clarification on how not doing this competitively would benefit the district. If that's just my general suggestion, if you could talk more about it, I appreciate it. If not, I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I can see where, in fact, when I read the agenda item at the top, I went, well, we're not going to waive competitive bidding, but what it comes down to, if I'm selling this to the highest bidder, it's easy. Just whoever gives me the most money, I give it to them. In the case of a lease, there could be conditions in the lease, length, difference. It isn't just about how much money a month you get, it's about, maybe they do something with the Little Leagues, maybe they do something for teacher housing, maybe there's other components in a lease that could make all of that very different. It's very complex, and to match apples and apples would be almost impossible. And so it isn't like we're going to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, John, come in here and you can lease it. We will probably have many, many, many people respond to the request for proposal. But it's a request for proposal as opposed to a bid process, so it's slightly different. We do it all the time at the school district with consulting contracts and things like that, but in this case, it's more of a rental agreement, so it's a very different terms, it could be different. Somebody could be giving you less now and end up with higher value at the other end. So that's when you sit down and have the attorneys evaluate, look at it, and see what the best outcome is. So that's my answer.
And living in the private sector, RFPs are done when you have complex issues that you need pricing on. You request an actual proposal, not just a bottom line number. It would be equivalent to going out and buying 1,500 cars as opposed to one. You might have a different process involving 1,500, involving maintenance and everything else. If you're buying one car, you go out and you say, okay, I need a price on that truck versus this truck. If I'm buying 1,500 trucks, how do you maintain them? Do you provide fuel? How do you deliver them? When do I get them brought on site, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of the difference between an RFP and a bidding process. So I'm wondering if that's making it any clearer for you, Clint. Okay. After any discussion, the president closes the public hearing. So I am closing the public hearing. Any further questions? Moving right along, we are now at 19.2, public hearing and board's initial response to the CSEA Chapter 845 initial proposal for the 2018-2019 school year. The CSEA Chapter 845 initial proposal for the 2018-2019 was submitted at a regular meeting of the Board of Education held on July 16, 2018. Copies of the proposal have been available in the city libraries and Human Resources Department for review by the public. A public hearing will be held on the CSEA Chapter 845 initial proposal for the 2018-2019 at this time. Is there any public comment related to the CSE Chapter 845 initial proposal for 2018-2019? Not seeing any comment. The Board of Education looks forward to continuation of cooperative and good faith contract negotiations with CSEA Chapter 845. The Board's initial response is to refer the CSEA Chapter 845 initial proposal for the 2018-2019 to the Board's representative for negotiations. Moving on to 9.3, if you thought that was exciting, brace yourself. Public hearing and board's initial response to the Torrance Unified School District proposal to CSEA Chapter 845 for 2018-2019. The Torrance Unified School District initial proposal to CSEA Chapter 845 for 2018-2019 was submitted at the regular meeting of the Board of Education held on July 16, 2018. Copies of the proposal have been available in the city libraries and the Human Resources Department for review by the public. A public hearing will be held on the Torrance Unified School District initial proposal to the CSEA Chapter 845 for 2018-2019 at this time. Is there any public comment related to the Torrance Unified School District's initial proposal for 2018-2019? Seeing none, the Board of Education looks forward to continuation of cooperative good faith contract negotiations with CSEA Chapter 845. The Board's initial response is to refer the Torrance Unified School District initial proposal to CSEA Chapter 845 for 2018-2019 to the Board's representative for negotiations. I actually asked Dr. Mannan today why we do this, and he said it's the law. So, if anybody's curious. Moving on to oral communications unscheduled hearing for non-agenda items. 10.1. The Board of Education welcomes input from the public in order to discuss district business in an orderly manner for the privacy and safety of speakers and to help staff respond more directly. The board policy requires that the public presentations to the board comply with certain procedures, including speakers to non-agenda items may address only items that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Time allotted for such presentations is limited to 3 minutes. Total time allotted for public input on non-agenda items is limited to 30 minutes. A speaker may not relinquish his or her time to another. When addressing the board, speakers are requested to state their name, address the president from the podium, and adhere to the applicable time limits. Complaints against employees or students will normally be heard in closed session, and the district's complaint procedure should be followed before discussion with the board. The board may remove disruptive individuals and order the room cleared if necessary. Any person who willfully disturbs any public school meeting is guilty of a misdemeanor, Education Code 32210. And we have a couple 3 cards here, and because I picked on her early, I'll call on Michelle Rushton first.
Good evening, Board, Mr. President. My name is Michelle Rushton. I'm a Torrance resident and was raised and educated in our community. As a member of TRAA, Torrance Refinery Action Alliance, I'm here tonight to remind you of the imminent threat that MHF poses to our community. Every day, Torrance residents, educators, parents, and children worry about their safety and their shared responsibility to protect one another in the event of an MHF release. MHF is effectively HF, a deadly chemical that has been phased out of almost all refineries in California in favor of safer alternatives. However, despite a public-led 28-year-long fight, we still permit its use here in Torrance. When MHF is released, it will form a ground-hugging cloud that will hover above our community and surrounding cities, poisoning all it encounters. The head of the Chemical Safety Board, tasked with investigating the 2015 explosion at Torrance Refinery, describes MHF as, quote, one of the most hazardous and deadly chemicals, end quote. She describes its effects, quote, in worst-case scenarios, it causes asphyxiation because once inhaled, it causes respiratory problems, which build up fluid and you ultimately drown, end quote. She says she feels lucky that the piece of metal that landed within 5 feet of the alkylation unit that houses MHF narrowly missed. If the alkylation unit had been struck that day, 22 schools would have been exposed to this deadly noxious gas. So far, TUSD's emergency plan consists of sheltering in place. Not one Torrance school educates parents or students on the MHF hazard, nor in recent years has practiced a realistic shelter-in-place drill with teachers and students sealing the rooms. MHF penetrates through every vent, window, and crack. In order for teachers to properly protect their students from an MHF cloud, they would have to have ample time and resources to seal off any potential entry point. Worse, in the event of an earthquake, none of this would be possible. We ask this board to stand with our community and send a letter to the AQMD in support of Rule 1410, which mandates MHF replacement within 4 years. The AQMD staff concluded months ago that the science proves that MHF is too deadly to be used in our community and should be phased out. The decision is now a political one, and we need the voice and support of our public institutions as the refinery and its allies work diligently behind the scenes to exert as much influence as possible. I'd like to highlight the action taken by the surrounding cities of Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, and Manhattan Beach, whose city councils have written to the AQMD in support of Rule 1410, as has the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. We urge you to stand with the science and our community by writing a letter to the AQMD in support of Rule 1410. Lastly, TRAA President Dr. Hayati couldn't be here tonight, but would happily meet with you to further explain the extreme danger posed by MHF alkylation, the importance of supporting a strong AQMD Rule 1410, and the need for good emergency preparedness to reduce casualties from an MHF release. She will be in touch. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Julie Stoll.
Good evening, President Wormers, Dr. Mannon, school board members, and cabinet members. My name is Julie Stoll, and I'm a teacher at Casimir Middle School. Back in November of 2016, I spoke to you about an extremely troubling issue regarding the Torrance refinery. The issue is that the Torrance refinery has 250,000 pounds of barely modified hydrofluoric acid. MHF is modified with only about 10% of an additive, making it actually 90% hydrofluoric acid. As I mentioned when I last spoke, hydrofluoric acid is extremely deadly and is so dangerous because it could travel for miles as a ground-hugging toxic cloud if an accidental release occurred. Such an accidental release nearly occurred in February of 2015. That explosion at the refinery is something that many teachers, students, and community members vividly remember. This explosion was nearly catastrophic because a piece of metal the size of a semi-truck nearly hit an MHF tank. For many of us, this was a wake-up call that such a deadly chemical has no place near our schools, homes, parks, and libraries. When I last spoke to you, I urged you to make a statement to the Torrance refinery asking them to convert to a safer alternative such as sulfuric acid. However, it has become evident that the Torrance refinery will not spend the money to convert to a safer substance on their own. Since that time, however, great strides have been made in the effort to educate the community about MHF. Now, the South Coast Air Quality Management District is considering a ban on HF and MHF. Therefore, I am asking you to write to the governing board of the AQMD expressing your support for Rule 1410, which would ban MHF and HF. The Redondo, Hermosa, Manhattan Beach City Councils, the Torrance Teachers Association, and many other organizations have written expressing their support for the ban. Please join these organizations and write to the AQMD to support Rule 1410. As a community, and particularly as individuals who have been tasked with protecting the welfare of our children, we need to stand up to the refinery and let them know that 250,000 pounds of modified hydrofluoric acid is not something we can allow near our schools. It is an unacceptable risk to our students' lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra Vieira?
Good evening, President Warmer, school board members, and cabinet members, my bosses. My name is Sandra Vieira, and I'm a mother and a teacher here on special assignment. My most basic charge as a mother and a teacher is to keep children safe, and that's why I'm here today. I taught at Edison Elementary, so whenever I think of an MHF release, I think of Edison. Every day, more than 200 5 to 8-year-olds play outside during lunchtime. Imagine an MHF release during that time. And at Edison, my room was next to the playground, so the emergency plan called for getting children on the playground into my room. Now, the thought of getting all 200 children into my classroom before a cloud of MHF strikes is daunting enough. But even if I could, that is only the first step. I would have to prevent the gas from entering the classroom. So the plan calls for duct tape all around the door and all around the windows. And we have tall windows and no ladders. But we have tables though, so I imagine that if I put a chair on top of a table and stand on the chair, I would be able to reach the top of the windows. Now you have to remember, I might have up to 200 children in a room, so it would take me a while to get to the bin that has a duct tape in it, take it out, clear the children enough to move the table under a window, put a chair on the table, get up on it, and tape the window off. Then I would have to begin the process all over again for the next window. Then I would tackle the door. I know I should put a wet towel under the door, so I would go back to the bin, find the water and the towel, wet the towel, stuff it under the door. Last, I would probably get a chair. I could probably reach the chair with a chair to tape all around it. All of this with dozens, if not hundreds, of children clamoring for my attention and crying. Now, Edison is just a few blocks from the Torrance refinery. This means that an MHF gas cloud could reach Edison Elementary in about 4 to 7 minutes. 4 to 7 minutes to get the children off the playground and complete all these tasks. North High would probably have a minute or two less. Yukon Elementary and Magruder Middle, probably a minute or two more. Now, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, we had an excellent police training here for all the Torrance teachers. And I will never forget what they told us. They said the teachers who saved children had to choose to put the children's safety first. And that is why I'm here today. In order to protect the children, I have to do everything I can to ban MHF. But I don't have the power. You have the power to lend the voice of the Torrance Unified School District, the school system that has all 23,500 students in reach of that MHF cloud, to tell the AQMD that modified hydrochloric acid must be banned. For the sake of the children in our district, I ask you to now act to support a deadline to convert to a safer alternative in 4 years. And I have turned in the letter that the Attorney General, Javier Becerra, had wrote to the AQMD supporting this claim. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now moving on to discussion action items. Instructions to the public. Speakers wishing to address the board on agenda topics are permitted 3 minutes per topic. Total time granted for public input shall be limited to 30 minutes per topic. Board policies require the public presentation to the board comply with certain procedures, including items 2 through 4 listed in oral communication. I have 11 cards, so that'll put us around 33, 38, something like that. Depends how fast we move in discussion, so I'll call on them accordingly. 11.2, adopt resolution number AS-
I apologize, because I put a card in, but I wanted to make an oral comment. I would just...
About? On a non-agenda item?
Non-agenda item.
Your card's here.
Pink card?
Yeah, I've got your card here.
So not for oral. Not for,
Yeah, you've got me confused.
do you want to let him speak under orals?
What number does it say you want to speak to?
Really quick.
No, he
Sure.
submitted a question.
Sure, let's just make for 3 minutes. Go ahead, Clint.
I'm really apologetic, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry for the procedure I put in the card. I meant to make it for orals and the agenda item, but anyway. My apologies, I got to gather my thoughts here. First of all, it's great to be here. I've heard Mr. Lee comment a few times that, maybe only 10 people are watching school board meetings, and I'm one of those 10. I'm a big fan of the meetings. While I'm here, I should say, I try to DVR the meetings so I can watch them kind of at my own time. And sometimes I forget to DVR, and I really appreciate whoever puts these up on the YouTube channel. I've been following that channel for a long time, and I really appreciate how quickly they're up, and the quality of those videos is really good. So I just wanted to say that real quick. A couple things I just wanted to mention. I'm here. I wouldn't have come here probably just for this, but since I am here already, I'm just going to mention these things. One thing, I live near Anza. I have 2 kids that are going to be attending there next year, and it's very exciting to see some of the bond renovations taking place at that school site, and to see all the hard work that's been put into the community invested in with these bonds and seeing that come to fruition. I mean, it is exciting. I can't tell you how excited my children are to be able to use new bathrooms at the school. So that is really cool. But a couple things about that. I was there. I live there, so last couple weekends. I know it's been hot, but it really seems like the AC has been left on like all weekend. And I'm not an expert. I can't say for absolute certain that it's AC, but it certainly seems like the AC. It sounds like the AC. And so I don't know. It seems kind of like a waste of money. So I thought I'd just bring to your attention since I'm here. The other thing is at Victor and Anza. So some of you may know I spend a lot of time on those fields with the AYSO soccer program, and the grass is looking pretty not so great right now. Obviously, I know that they haven't been watering for a while, but if there's anything that can be done to try to start watering again, because the AYSO soccer season starts really soon, and I'm a little worried about what we're going to do, especially at Victor. I mean, I know you have, it seems like there's not much activity, construction activity going on the south lawn, the big south lawn. I'm wondering if that field in particular could at least be watered. That would be great. And then the last thing, since I'm up here, I've been following actions that occur with the board for a long time, and there's a lot of good, and there's some things that I question, obviously, but since I'm up here and it's been on my mind, I just did want to say, of a lot of things that have come forward, I think maybe the most concerning for me is the situation that's occurred recently with the contract negotiations, and I heard Mr. Stephan talk at one of the recent board meetings, and I know for my kids, there's nothing that impacts their education like a teacher, and the thought that the morale might be a little lessened because of what's happening with the contract negotiations is, I think, should be concerning to every parent. I don't think the issue is getting nearly as much attention as it deserves. And then, don't get me wrong, I know everyone up there and probably everyone here is very concerned about it. But I just want to be one voice from the community, because I watch these meetings and nobody gets up here and says anything. But I know people are concerned about it. I certainly am. And if there's anything that can be done, I hope that situation gets rectified quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. I pulled your card for your 11.2 and sent it away. Did you still want to speak to 11.2?
I do. But if
Okay.
you have to go through the thing again, that's okay.
all right, but I'll call you up. Can I get that card back? I'll call you up when the time comes. Thank you. All right, no other interruptions. Adopt Resolution AS-03-18/19 of the Board of Education of the Torrance Unified School District accepting advisory committee recommendation regarding district real property, declaring property surplus, declaring intent to offer property for lease, authorizing the solicitation of lease through a bid process, and authorizing the concurrent request for a waiver of competitive bidding procedures under Education Code Section 17466, etc. Dr. Stowe.
So
I'm
moved.
sorry? Dr. Stowe?
Thank you, Mr. Wormers, members of the board. This is the resolution that Andrea Shaltis spoke about, so if there are specific questions about this, he's still available for any questions that the board may have.
Okay. Mr. Lee, was your light on by accident?
Yeah, it's just,
Okay, I'm sorry. Does anyone else has any questions concerning this?
Not a question, but a comment. I just want to
Certainly,
thank
Mr. Sutton.
the members of the 7-Eleven committee for all the work they did, and all those meetings they went to, and all the people who commented, the community that commented on it. So I just want to say thank you very much and our attorney for a job well done, getting it done. What we do with it will come up. But
yeah, they all get many gold stars. I have mentioned it privately to a few of them, but I'm not sure they would have signed up if they knew what it was involving, but, you'll be rewarded at some point. I'm not sure that we'll give you a certificate of high perceived value at some point, but something along the way. But thank you very much for that.
Mrs. Reagans?
Yeah, I wanted to second that and to the ladies in the front row, I know the emotional stress and strain of being a participant and actually interacting with your fellow citizens was really important to you, so I appreciate that on your part, as well as the folks who did come and speak to the committee. So I think that was a really productive thing. Thank you so much for doing that. I just wanted to ask, the actual report is posted somewhere on our website?
It's on the website.
Okay, so it is available for anybody who wants to see it in its entirety, including the recommendations that came from that committee forward to us, which are the things that were mentioned this evening. So it's all there, and actually lots of good information about what they actually did with the process. Thank you.
I, too, would like to thank the committee, the people who spoke, came up and spoke, and Andreas as well, for taking a very complex issue and dicing it down as thin as you could possibly make it to make it something we could understand. So I appreciate your efforts and the committee's efforts, and it was a lot more than you expected when you signed on, I'm sure. Somewhere near the end of it, you're like, well, why did I do this? But we all appreciate it very much. Let me start with calling on, what we'll do again is we'll do the full 3 minutes. It'll only put us at about 33 minutes if everyone is very quick. I'll call the first name and then call who's on deck. So we'll start with Margaret and Mr. Berumum. I can never say your name right, for God's sake, forgive me.
Good evening, school board members and audience members who are at home tonight and are interested in the Hamilton topic, but unfortunately weren't able to be here due to such short notice, which I'll add was legal but strategic on behalf of the district and not a good example of how a government agency should involve their constituents. North Torrance Little League and Girls Softball League have been told not to worry because both leagues are going to be kept whole. The questions our organizations have been asking since day one, which the district has been unable to answer, is where will we go? There is no room in North Torrance to keep both leagues whole, which includes 4 fields, without adversely impacting the surrounding schools and residents. Realistically, finding 4 fields is probably a stretch to maybe a possibility. The Little League has to abide by boundary issues, so they need to stay within their set boundaries. The Girls League, on the other hand, does not have boundary constraints. My suggestion is to keep the Little League in North Torrance and to relocate North Torrance Girls Softball to Levy Adult Education Facility, as there currently are 3 fields and a 4th can be built. This approach is better for the following reasons. K-8 students in North Torrance will not lose field space, as well as the other youth leagues that currently use these facilities on a daily basis. If we were to bring in our fields to North Torrance facilities, this would extremely impact students of these schools, as well as to the after-school programs and youth that practice there. This also has less parking impacts to North Torrance neighborhoods, which currently do not have the capacity for parking for all of these additional car flows into the areas. There's just not sufficient parking in North Torrance neighborhoods. Thirdly, this is less costly to TUSD, who does have as we've been told in all the presentations, who does have budget issues. This would cost less money to build capital infrastructure of 2 new multi-use fields. And again, Levy already has 3 dedicated softball fields. Lastly, this is the most equitable approach in treating both girls softball leagues fairly and without favoring one league over the other league. If what the district is reporting out there is true, a negative general fund balance, decreasing students, decreasing ADA funds, of an increased financial burden to their operating budget for maintenance of the aquatic center, an estimated $500K per year, this means that sharing Levy makes financial sense for the district, and this is what I would like to suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, you're on deck.
Good evening. Good evening to those at home tonight. For those of you looking for the presentation that was presented tonight on on Hamilton, that's actually 8.1, presentation regarding advisory committee report next steps. That's not very transparent for someone doesn't knowing that's trying to catch up on what's going on with Hamilton. It would have been nice if that item would have said something about Hamilton surplus or something, but again, it's very hard to find. The next part I want to discuss is that selection of the committee. 8 members. 2 of the members that said no were part of the North Torrance Homeowner Association. One of the members that abstained was Jess Negrete. Ms. Dupron, her husband works for the district. Mr. Lee, he's on the Bond Oversight Committee. You got to pick different people to represent different committees. It's very important to involve the whole community, not just keep asking the same people. Jay Estabrook, he's an employee of North Torrance. Ms. Noland, she's actually a PTA member, so I think she was unbiased, and she brought a lot of different concerns to the 7-Eleven committee, but she was also a yes. And Mr. Sheck, he was also an employee, he's a North Torrance principal. It's very important to involve the community. Once you do that, then it makes it a lot easier to make some tough decisions so that people feel like they had a voice in the process. And through the whole process, we haven't felt, North Torrance hasn't felt like we've had a voice in the process, which makes it very hard on us for us to accept a very tough decision. And if it is a tough decision that has to be made, it would have been a lot easier for us to say, I get it. You know, they looked at every possibility, they did this, and it was a fair decision, but it makes it very hard for us to feel like it was a fair decision based on all the different things that we keep seeing. There's, not enough communication, not open, not transparent. Public hearing notice held in the middle of the summer. You've had this report for a while. Why not wait another month till September when you have more people here? When you can, send it out, let all the constituents know. I mean, that's the hard part. It makes it very hard to understand and to accept this decision. Thank you very much.
After Sarah, I have Aaron Mance.
Good evening. I wanted to expand a little bit on what Mr. Berman said. January 8th meeting that was for the 7-Eleven committee, you did advertise it, but that was after we had canvassed our community over Christmas break to put door hangers in and inform our community about the actual committee meeting. I don't think you guys have been helpful enough in sharing this information with stakeholders and with parents. As like Giselle said, it would have been great to get a communicator email for all the families that are based out of North Torrance to know that this meeting was even happening tonight. I received my Torrance Adult School brochure in the mail, and I'm incredibly disappointed to see that Hamilton is just being cut out of a lot of different educational opportunities. Older adults who are looking for physical fitness, you will not find that at Hamilton. Personal finance and computer classes, not at Hamilton. Medical support career, not at Hamilton. Business and finance classes, not at Hamilton. You have some very disappointed people in North Torrance, and I'm really grateful that there are new people that want to try and become a board member and bring positive change, like Miss Betty Liu, who is running for school board, and Mr. Alejandro Santa Ana. We need people that advocate for North Torrance and look at the whole. We're not looking for people to give us an advantage. We are asking for equality. When you selected Hamilton, you did not select Hamilton in a democratic way. It was not, let's look at all of our adult schools and pick one. It was Hamilton, 7-Eleven committee comes in, and they make their vote, and that was incredibly unfair. And you will find out more about how unhappy we are in November. Thank you.
Aaron, you'll be followed by Janine Alvalara.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. When I went to Arlington Elementary School as a child, Hamilton wasn't elementary school, well, it was K through 8 back then, but, and all the schools in the area were full. Shortly after they did close Hamilton, I guess due to lack of enrollment. But now I see, every time I pass schools in the Torrance area, rows and rows of toxic trailers that we are forcing our children to attend school in, because we've closed and demolished schools that we had sitting there. And now we have Hamilton, that served very well as an adult school for many years and has slowly been edged out, and we don't want it there anymore, so we'll take the classes away. So now it won't ever be used for that again. And you talk about the projections. Well, you know, projections can say anything you want them to say. I've been in business for a long time, and you can get numbers to do whatever you want. And there's a lot of elderly in North Torrance that, unfortunately, for one reason or another, may be leaving the area. And I have noticed that a lot of young people have been moving in, and young couples have babies. Where are they going to go to school? Those projections are going to change, I believe. I did notice also in the presentation tonight that the recommendation was to, unfortunately, make the property a surplus, but their first recommendation was to keep it as is. The bullet points at the end, I never saw that. I saw lease, I saw sell, which was never part of the recommendation. There was a big focus on that, and that really upsets me and makes me wonder about the whole process in the first place. I admire the 7-Eleven committee for the work they did. Unfortunately, I think they wasted months of their time because I think this was already determined. One other question I kind of had is why, in creating the agenda, was the waiver discussion put before this? I think this information should have come before it's decided whether you're going to vote on a waiver or not. Thank you for your time.
Janine Alvalara will be followed by Nanette Nolan.
Hello, President Olmers. My name is Jeannie Aguilar, and I am a resident of North Torrance, a graduate of North High, and I'm the current president for NTGSL softball. Today, I just want to speak about the girls and what our community of softball gives to our young women. And I just know that you guys are moving forward with this waiver vote, and you guys have already made some decisions on how you're going to roll with this, regardless of whether you've told us or not. But I just want you guys to remember that there is so few opportunities for our young women. There really are. And I just want to point out to you that softball is a sport. It does give an opportunity for our girls to advance. Some of us aren't always the strongest in education. We need to supplement with some type of sport to get us further. It pays the bills when they go to college, and it gives them that opportunity. For our girls, they have to make decisions about their career and their education opportunities when they're 14 years old. 14. That's the end of our softball program here. And that's the way it puts them on the road to be able to pursue scholarship that supplement their education. So if they're not that A student or that B+ student that can earn a scholarship on education, they have this sport available to them to be able to balance that out. I know that it is mentioned we can integrate with Levy, and it sounds like a kind of a good idea, but in North Torrance, we are not the wealthiest side of town. We have
sibling families, and it's difficult for us to get there. It just is. And plus the fact that we're just proud to be in North Torrance, and we're proud to represent our part of the community and what we enhance our community with. I mean, just recently, we were able to make it to nationals, which has been an ultimate goal for this 12U program since they started at 6 years old. And these are our ultimate goals for all these girls, because it gives them opportunities to be able to move on with the sport to supplement their education. So I just want you to consider what you're doing to our young women. When you're giving away this field and when you're selling it, you're cutting a lot of girls short on what their potential could be. And it's just disheartening to see this happening to us. And I just want to encourage you to really, really, I don't know how else to say it. You just got to think about it, because it just means more than the dollars that you're talking about. I know that it's the minority versus the majority and how it's going to help. But honestly, what we do to our young women and how we challenge them every time they get to a point, we always hold them back. And I don't see why.
Annette Nolan, followed by Michelle Roa.
I'm here as a committee member, but not representing the committee. Clearly, I wouldn't try to speak for anyone. I can say that it was 100% very difficult. Having lived on the north side most of my adult life, raised my kids on this side of town, I can speak, at least anecdotally, and say that there are more families where there's single moms raising kids, single parents, grandparents raising kids. Most of my daughters and sons' friends actually don't either live in the immediate area or live in really mixed, kind of disadvantaged situations, which is what made it really difficult to make. What I still stand by my vote. I still know that by definition surplus is what it is, but it's painful. It's painful to say that. It's painful to think that. As a mom who has two athletic kids, it's difficult to know that. I know it's not the district's role to facilitate parks and recreation. That's a Torrance function, and I hope sincerely that they do something about it, because it's unfair that of all the quadrants, that's the one quadrant that doesn't have a facility that is equal to those in others. And I don't know that that was a purposeful thing. I don't have some kind of conspiracy theorist idea about that, but having been raised by a single mom, and we were working poor, like counting change to get food poor. I can tell you that traveling to Levy would have been difficult for my mom. She got her GED at Hamilton. I think I guess I'm trying to get down to saying is that whatever you do, I respect it. I just hope sincerely that you guys try your best to keep resources available to the families who will need it the most. Okay, I'm going to sit down. Thanks.
Michelle, you'll be followed by Sandra Reagan.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle, and this is my daughter Juliet and my son John. Juliet was a member of that 12U national team that just came home yesterday. You guys should be very proud. 2 Torrance teams came in the top 4 out of the Western Nationals. Torrance placed second. We lost to them. That's okay. And we placed 4th. We don't have our beautiful trophy yet. It's at the head coach's house, but you guys will be able to see that. I wanted to bring her and the trophies that we won. We won 3 first-place trophies this year, 2 second-place trophies this year in all the tournaments that we were in, 5 tournaments. Spent the week in Camarillo for Nationals. Western Nationals was hosted by Southern California this year. Great accomplishment. We've been here since 6U at North Torrance Fields at Hamilton. To see them leave this wonderful legacy that we worked so hard for, it's really sad. I played there in the 80s. We weren't as good. I tell it all the time. I didn't earn all these wonderful trophies in the 80s. Softball wasn't what it was in the 80s. But to see that program grow so amazingly over the last 20 years, and to see the legacy that these 12U girls are going to give to North Torrance, it's hard to go with Torrance because we have that rivalry between Torrance and North Torrance. It's nice, it's fun to play against each other, but it's not going to be the same when you combine the teams or you combine the leagues. my opinion, it would be best to find somewhere in North Torrance to keep North Torrance what it is. These girls deserve to play in North Torrance. They deserve to represent the city of North Torrance because they have worked so hard for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra Reagan will be followed by Benjamin Reed.
Good evening. As you can see the face and my hair, I am representing an older amount of people in the north end of Torrance. We've been over there about 40 years, over 40 years. I have numerous neighbors around me that have been there all longer than us. All of us have raised our children in North Torrance, and they attended North Torrance schools, went to various events, and I attended adult school, and my husband, both of us, attended the adult school over there, and all of the boys, because we have boys, all the boys in my neighborhood went over to school to play. And by doing that, there is more than just a park going on, or playground, or park, like a field. There's a community of people that you start to, and the children's, it's a community developing. They will go to the schools and have those kids and their baseball teams in the schools with them, and they'll grow up. And there's in the Los Angeles area, there's millions and millions of people where North Torrance, and I suspect I've never lived in other parts, but there is a real community when you have kids attending school and parents that are going to adult school. And it takes more than a village to raise children. And they develop a feeling of community, a real sense of community. And I'm really afraid for the children in the future if we lose that. But it does seem to me that you've already sort of made up your mind. And I can tell you I'm rather active in my neighborhood, and I have a number of people who didn't come tonight because they said, why bother? They've already made up their mind. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of other reasons besides that most of us over there feel like we're illegitimate children, because when we speak, we don't feel we're getting heard. It appalls me, and I feel sad for them if they feel that way. So with that in mind, I want to tell you that I am, as a citizen in North Torrance, very concerned for the amount of traffic that will be increased on 182nd Street. I'm very unhappy about the numbers, lights and things for the houses that are surrounding that area. On the east side, there's a whole tract of houses. And I'm concerned for them that it won't be the same. They'll have a lot of lights and more noise, more pollution, just the whole thing. And so, and there's not a lot of parks in that neighborhood either that's been expressed. My kids maybe would go with Dad over also to the school and play on the fields, fly a kite, whatever. And there's not a lot of that over there. So by taking out Hamilton, that's lost forever. So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate you letting me speak. Thank you.
Benjamin Reed will be followed by Alan Glasband.
Hi, good evening. My name is Benji Reed. I'm a parent, a student in North Torrance Schools, and also my wife attends adult school at Hamilton. She's been there for the last 3 years learning English, which has been wonderful. And she's come quite a long way. When I first met her, she was unable to understand or speak much at all, but because of the program there, she now understands almost everything we talk about, and also can speak quite a bit, which is great. So I just wanted to come here because I've been involved in school politics and when I was in Colorado and also here in California. I know the tough position the board is in. I understand that. You have a district to run, you have a budget to manage, and you have to look at your surplus, and I understand that. I think that my concern here is that in the time that I've been in Torrance, the 7 years I've been here in Torrance, I think it's a wonderful community. I think the schools are fantastic, and I think that you guys are doing a great job managing it. But I think we should be careful about what we're planning to do, because I think the North Torrance area does need this kind of facility. I think that one of the slides that came up earlier, we talked a lot about the potentially declining enrollment. There was also, though, I noted that there was wait list at the adult school. They had a full enrollment plus about 100 and something waitlisted there. I think the adult school, as well as the fields, should be something we really consider. And this just feels, hearing from the community and kind of trying to keep track of this over the last few months, it feels a little bit like we're giving up on something. Giving up on an opportunity for a school, giving up on an opportunity for a community, and maybe a number of communities, because there's so many communities that work together at that location. I, for one, go at the end of every semester to my wife's potluck at the end of their classes and attend there. I've taken a dance class there myself in the adult school. I just think it's a great opportunity. So I would encourage the board to think this through. You probably have quite a bit already. I'm also concerned, and I think some folks have expressed this tonight already, but it does seem odd that we're having the meeting tonight in the middle of August when a lot of people are on vacation. There wasn't a lot of clear public announcement about this. The way that it's listed, of course, it's a little bit, deep in the way that the wording is listed on the agenda. It does feel odd, and this feels like something when you're going to close a school, and I've seen schools closed before, and I understand sometimes the reasons. It seems like something you should make a really big deal about and kind of grin and bear it and have to withstand lots and lots of people coming through and talking. We have a good group here, but really my sense is that there's, from the communities that we've heard from in the last few months, I think there are maybe hundreds of others who would like to have a voice and talk about this. And I think it would behoove the community and the board to really consider, before you make a final decision, that you actually have the opportunity to have a very public board meeting with good notice ahead of time and have that conversation. Because I think that it shouldn't be happening right now. But I do appreciate your time, and I encourage us really to think about what we can do to preserve a really great community asset and what we can do with it in the future. Thank you.
Alan Glasman will be followed by Clint Paulson.
Good evening, members of the board, community. I'm Alan Glassman. I'm a homeowner in North Torrance. I work and live in North Torrance. My kids go to school in North Torrance. And I actually like North Torrance a lot. I moved there a few years ago, and really peaceful community. One of the best parts of North Torrance is Hamilton Adult School. And I used to only think it was because of the baseball fields, because I just drove in there, did the baseball, and drove away. And then, thank you. This is my friend Zenobia. She represents North Torrance as well. After we started this about 9 months ago, and we started canvassing the community, asking for public comments about Hamilton Adult School, like Ms. Reagan said, there's a lot of people who didn't make it because of the feeling of apathy, like, oh, it's already done. There's people who didn't make it because they just really can't. They got like messed up legs. They're not in a condition to. I mean, just to put it right out there, they can't get here literally with me carrying them up the stairs. They didn't want to come anyway. So they used to take adult school classes over there, and they're really bummed out that they don't have the adult school classes over there. As Miss Duenas showed, they're just cut out of the program. The director of the adult schools did come one night, and one thing that really impressed me is that he said that it's not only self-sustained, it actually creates income for Torrance Unified School District in his report, which was definitely downplayed a lot. And the thought that went through my mind at that meeting, because I was kind of new at that point to the whole school board, and like, what do they, I was like, why the heck is a school board worried about making money? Then I'm like, oh, hello. Kids got to have a classroom and everything else, right? So, but the job of a school board is to make sure our schools are educating our children properly, not making money. Like, what the heck? Like, the Torrance City Council should worry about that. I know you guys are going to get your 5% increases in salary, which they don't count as raises. When I asked one of the directors, Ms. Crumpy, and she says, those aren't raises, those are scheduled increases in pay. I'm like, whoa, okay, semantics 101. The whole community uses that school. People who aren't here for any particular reason go, oh, they're going to sell Hamilton? I go there for my church thing. And we get dropped off and picked up by buses there. That's where they use for buses on the weekend. That school is used for so many different things, and those numbers, again, as someone else mentioned already, can be construed to say whatever you want them to say. A lot of people who are selling homes, there's another realtor in this room right now who's been there longer than me, will tell you that the people who are selling and moving away don't have kids. The people who are buying and moving in do have kids. So please do something that represents North Torrance, not the whole city of Torrance, because we need something in our part of town. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Paulson?
Good evening again, Board, and I just wanted to quickly apologize. I mean, I know this is my third time up here, and I didn't necessarily intend to do that, and I guess I am very interested in what happens here, and I don't get to attend very often, and so I thought I'd just take advantage and get up here a few times. And one reason I can't attend is because I often have practice for youth sports that I coach and so on Monday nights, and so it's very difficult for me to be here. And that speaks to kind of the two passions I have right now outside of family, which are sports and politics. And this issue kind of intertwines them both very closely, and so it's an issue that kind of has created a lot of emotional churn for myself as I thought about it. And I think that the board's in a difficult position. This is not going to be an easy decision, for sure. But I would want to encourage the board to consider how this is currently being sold to the community. As someone who tries to follow things closely, I've kind of had a challenge on some of the basic fundamental questions of this topic, like why are we doing this exactly? What is the financial picture in the district? How is this going to impact it? What is truly driving this decision? Why Hamilton versus some other sites? What will happen to the Little League and softball fields? Why can't we get maybe some very clear details on proposals for that should this occur? Even as we talk about the decision tonight, there seems to be a lot of vagaries, I should say. Are we going to waiver, no waiver? Are we going to lease? Are we going to sell? What are the parameters? So there seems to be a lot of unanswered questions, and I think the community is really looking for this to be sold just a little bit better. But the main reason I think that motivated me in being here tonight is I've followed this closely for a long time, and I've seen so many individuals, like many of the folks that have spoke here tonight, and I think my message is really for them. I thank you for being strong advocates for the community. The folks that have been up here, I've seen some of their faces time and time again in various forums and venues, and they've inspired me. It's not easy to come to these meetings. It's a big sacrifice. It's not easy to get up here, but many of these folks have, and they've tried to create a groundswell of community support for their issue. It's very difficult to do, and I admire them for it. The thing I love about sports and why I love sports is because it brings people together. It's a great unifier. The thing I hate about politics, even though I do like politics, the thing I hate about it is it's a great divider among people. And if I've listened to a lot of them, my one biggest regret is I feel a lot of the folks are saying, hey, North Torrance, we're getting the shaft, we're being picked on. And you never see people from West Torrance come up really that often. I'm from West Torrance. I want you to know that I feel like this is a Torrance issue, not a North Torrance issue. I coach in Little League. I just want you to feel there's more support than just North Torrance. And I really feel like we've probably failed the North Torrance community in that regard because there hasn't been enough people up here from outside North Torrance, and I want to apologize myself
Clint,
for
we're
that.
well over time.
Sorry about that.
All right, I have a motion and a second on, I have comments. Mr. Stefan, I believe was first.
All right. A lot has been said over the last number of months, whether it was during the discussions about negotiations with a teacher or this particular item, that the district is not being forthright. The district is hiding things and titles, or, I know a number of people were called by the district and were informed ahead of time about this meeting. You know, I mean, but that I don't want to get into, because the conspiracy theory, divided, whatever. But that's not what this is. None of us are trying to hide something about North Torrance. And somebody said, why Hamilton? Well, if I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will never be allowed to put a K-8 student on that site again because of its proximity to the freeway. Am I correct?
Yes.
No point of order. Well, I don't know what point of order. I don't know anything about Rule of Robert's rules. I apologize for that. That's my fault. I'm sorry. I don't know how point of order works.
That's how it works.
It's we're done with the public hearing.
Yes, we're done with public hearing. If you were asking me that question, I pointed out at a board meeting, I don't know, several months ago, that our attorney, who handles construction issues statewide, pointed out that if in fact we attempted to reopen that school as a K-8 school, we would need to put money into the school, and quite frankly, there are no funds available. So assuming that there are a bond to provide funds, and again, this is all theoretical, once we did that, then we would have to reapply to the state. Now, there was a speaker who disagreed with that, and that's okay. But I can tell you that our attorney contacted and knows, because he deals with it every day, that then the issue of proximity to the 405 freeway would be brought up in terms of reopening that site. And I certainly understand what some folks said about demographics and numbers, but the folks that we use have been within 0.5% for the last 10 years. So it is a mathematical algorithm that they use, and they have been, quite frankly, almost spot on with those numbers over the last 10-year period.
Now, I also want to address the recommendations of the 7-Eleven committee. One person came up here and we talked about, think of North Torrance, and I understand. I totally understand the history, the tradition of these fields. I get it, all right? I absolutely understand it, but right in their recommendations, that I'm pretty sure everybody on this particular board would agree with this. Also, the advisory committee recommends that the district relocate the North Torrance Little League and the North Torrance Girls Softball League to fields in the North Torrance area that meet the needs of the leagues and provide similar opportunities and benefits as the property's ball fields. I take that incredibly seriously. That's in the recommendation. And whether we go through a lease, you get into the whole thing about the contractor having to define the place or do this or develop the place. And yeah, is it vague now? Yeah, because this is just a recommendation. We've decided to buy a house. So now we're going to go look. Now we're going to figure it out. How are we going to get it done? But I take that part of the committee's recommendation probably the most seriously of any other part. So the person said, but the other person said about people running for board, she said, think of all. Think of everyone. And then when I personally am going to make this decision, I'm thinking of what that school is, what can we do with the dollars from if we do decide to lease this? Are we committed to relocating those fields? Yeah, I'm thinking that these are the things I'm thinking of all. Because the dollars off that site don't go to one place, they go to everyone, and everyone who needs it. So these are all the things that, not just me, but these people are thinking about. And I'm sad, I'm sorry, that you feel that we're trying to slip things in August, or our titles are vague, but these are titles that what the law says. I don't know if the law demands it, but these are what these things are. Half the time I don't understand. I got to call up and see what's that one mean. But I apologize if you feel that way. I apologize if you feel that we are trying to put one over on you, no matter how the vote goes tonight. But that has definitely never been my intention, nor do I feel it's been the district's intention. So I have, done.
Mr. Lee?
Thank you. A couple of things have been said over and over and over again, and I've been uncharacteristically quiet and thought maybe I'd talk about some of the things. It is now my 19th year as an elected official in this town, both as a city councilman and a school board member. So I've kind of got a view from both sides. One of the first things I had to recognize when I first became a school board member was the city side has many disciplines, whether it be police, fire, parks and recreation, streets, a bunch of different things that they do together to create the community. The school district, on the other hand, has really one main goal, and it is to educate children by the ages of kindergarten and 12th grade. Everything else that we do around that has to support that for me to support it, because we only do one thing. So, yeah, people use our fields. We make our fields available to little leagues and soccer and everybody that when we don't use them, we make them available. We make our facilities available to the city to use them and vice versa and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, what we're tasked with, or at least what I think I'm tasked with, is providing the best possible environment for K through 12 kids. So if adult schools suddenly stop making money, we probably wouldn't do it anymore because it would take money away from K-12. We've eliminated things since I've been up here because it took money away from K-12. I've been self-employed for 41 years, so maybe I got a little different view of the world, but the Torrance Unified School District has an asset that is worth between $30 and $40 million, who knows, at this point. And certainly as a city councilman and as a school board member, I've always looked for ways to maximize the assets for the common good of the organization. How I look at my business, how do I maximize my revenue? Now I know that government does not act like my business. I can make unilateral decisions there. I can't make unilateral decisions here. But if I could take an asset that quite honestly at this moment in time has nothing to do with K-12. It has an adult school, and the field in the back is rented out to the North Torrance Little League and the North Torrance Girls Softball League. If I can turn around and monetize that to $2 to $4 million a year in lease revenue, then all of a sudden that helps every kid all 23,000 kids in the school district. And that's what I'm charged. At least that's what I think I'm charged with for up here. When we started this process, really the first thing we talked about was, obviously, do we need the site? But the second thing in a lickety-split was, what are we going to do about the Little Leagues? We get accused of just being the most callous, rude, unapproachable, I'll go on, but that was the first thing we talked about. And the other thing which I find to be a little interesting is my real cell phone number is in the website. You can call me anytime you want. My real email address is on the website, or like now it forwards to it because of some new rule. But anyway, Google Don Lee and my business will come up. So that we're not accessible or transparent, I don't quite understand all the time, but that's, whatever it may be. People have brought up the idea of Sam Levy versus Hamilton quite a bit. It's a legitimate question. Here's a little background on that. In Southeast Torrance, we had a school called J.H. Hall. And, before I was on the board, it was declared that you couldn't put kids in it anymore. So we moved those kids from Southeast Torrance over to the Sam Levy site, and we spent a lot of money fixing that school up. Money that, that has made it a much better facility than it was when before they moved in there. So that site is in better shape than Hamilton, not because we didn't like North Torrance and we like South Torrance better. We had to move a school from Southeast Torrance over there to fix it up. So at this point in time, if I'm going to manage my assets, the Hamilton site is probably not in as good a condition as the Sam Levy site. We call that a brick school. It's made out of brick. Those schools have aged a little better than the other ones. So when we looked at that, we did look at that, and that was kind of what the decision was behind that, was that the Hamilton site was in not as good a shape. I don't think, you sit up here and you see things a little differently. But certainly, we don't sit up here to pick fights. We don't sit up here to make meetings last 2-3 hours when they should last a half an hour. We kind of look for ways to maximize what we have to do for the entire community. But again, and Mr. Steffens said it, and I've said it till I'm blue in the face, those little leagues will remain in North Torrance in facilities as good or better than what they have now. But, as we say, because there was something brought up that, this all seems a little squishy, as far as the recommendation and the resolution and all that goes with it, and it's probably true because we can't unilaterally do anything. We don't have a zone on the site, we don't know how much money we're going to get paid for the site, we don't know how any of that's going to end up. And all of that will affect everything else that comes from it. This isn't like I get to vote and have a textbook, or I get to vote and we, remodel a school, and we as a school board can control all the variables, what it costs, who the contractor is, what all that is. What we've done now is basically said, okay, it's surplus. So now we're going to spend the next 150 days or so, maybe a little longer, offering it to everybody else and going through that process. And when that is all done, then that is the position in which we will then go out, look at RFPs, go through that process, figure out who's the best fit, and it's, to some extent, we get to pick who gets to go through the process with the city, but then the process with the city will involve an EIR and zone changes and all of that, of which you will have, every single person in this room will have the opportunity to go and speak to the city council, talk to them about this issue all over again. And they have 240 seats instead of 60, so there'll be more room for you. And they're more comfortable seats, both there and here. And so, and then you'll have that chance to do it again. So this is basically, as we said way back at the beginning, really the first few steps of a process. But there isn't, even as city councilman in 1992, people from North Torrance would get up and say largely the same thing that I'm hearing tonight. And overtly, for the entire 19 years that I've been up here, I have tried to do whatever I could do, right down to fancy stuff on the front of North High when that man over there wanted to take it off because he was scared about the budget, and we as a board put it all back in. So it looked like a place, it had a community. Now, we're not in charge of how much parks you got to talk to the people on Torrance Boulevard, but know that we will come up with a solution based upon a bunch of variables that we don't quite know about at this point. So for me to turn around and say, it's going to be in this spot, and then come back and say, never mind, is going to be two fights when I can maybe we'll keep it down to one fight. So I don't know what else I probably cut myself and do it in blood someplace, but I don't know what else I can say, and, it always reminds me of when I got elected to the city council in '92. Ken Miller, who's still alive, pulled me aside. He's going to be 95 on the 21st of this month. But he pulled me aside, and I was this young 35-year-old kid, and he says, Don, you got to remember something. I said, what? He says, you're responsible for this year, you're responsible for 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years out. number one. Number two is, you have to be able to take the personalities out of it and deal with the issues, which means that when that sweet, nice, kind, older woman gets up and she's dead wrong, and that kind of jerky guy gets up and kind of irritates you, but he's dead right, you have to make the right decision. And a lot of times this job involves that. And so that's kind of my way of saying, some of this has been a little hard for me to kind of sit up here and not say a word, but I haven't. But I think everybody on this board is committed to the level that you don't even understand, that you will have fields up there. You can have fields where they are now, maybe. I don't know at this point. But we need to get through the process. But I'll say it again, I'll say it again and again and again. North Torrance Little League, North Torrance Girls Softball, if they are relocated, will be relocated to fields in what would be commonly referred to as North Torrance, north of 190th Street. In that location with fields as good or better than they have now. And if they move, I'm kind of thinking, anything not 40 feet from the 405 freeway might be a little better, but I don't know, I'm not up there. But you will have that, everybody on this board said it 100 times, we'll continue to say it, and we'll go through this process, and I think this process will allow us to look at opportunities that benefit everybody in this district from kindergarten to 12th grade. Thank you.
Mrs. Reagans.
Thank you. I just have a couple of things. Thanks for the comments that all of you made this evening, by the way, and those of you who have made comments over the long haul and will continue to do so. You always give me pause and give me food for thought, and really I appreciate the perspective that each of you represents and brings to me to help me in my thought process. I just wanted to say that I've actually sat on this board for 15 years. Mr. Lee's been in politics longer, but I've sat on this board for 15 years, so I'm the longest-term person here, and I know that we have worked diligently over that entire time to be fiscally responsible and accountable. That goes with the adult school. You were saying they're making money now. There was a time when they were costing the district a tremendous amount, but we still supported them and kept them going because we thought it was such an important resource. We realized we could not continue that and that we had to alter our practices, which is exactly why the number of classes have changed and the solicitation of folks to make sure that only those classes that are bringing students continue so that it is self-sustaining. That's a huge improvement. Many school districts lost their adult schools. I just wanted to say that because it's been really a very important thing for Torrance Unified to keep our adult school and have it be so fiscally sound. I also wanted to say that to be fiscally responsible, we thought it was extremely important to look at all of the assets that we as a school district have within our school district. We can't go outside of the district and make money or bring in funds in any other way. So it behooved us to look at each and every one of our properties. And we will continue to do so, actually, over the years as things progress and things change and time goes on. But that's important for us to do as the fiscal agents for the school district, is to make sure that each of our properties and our assets is being used to the maximum possibilities for the school district. So that's why we're going through this process at all. And last but not least, saying that this was a predetermined outcome certainly was not the case for me. I actually live maybe half a mile from Hamilton. And it was very difficult for me to think about altering the use of that properties since I've lived there 32 years since my son just turned 32. Long time, and appreciate living in that community. So I certainly had not determined my decision until this evening and until actually probably right now when we do the vote. I want you to be aware of that. It may not be obvious to you that that's the case, but I wait and hear all of the input and everything I need to assimilate and put together, and hopefully it coalesces into a firm decision. So thank you all for being here, and the process will go on. It's still, what inning are we in now? Maybe first inning? Third? We're up to third?
Maybe.
I don't know. We got a long way to go yet.
A lot of road ahead of us.
Yeah, so, thank you.
I keep this and other sundry things up here because this is how I got started in this whole experience. It's been a strange and winding road, to put it mildly. I worked on Y&Z as just a citizen, and Mr. Lee and Dr. Mannon kind of moved the chess pieces around, so I ended up running for school board. But the reason I worked on Y&Z is I realized that this community needed to improve its schools. And I knew that, and I could tell that from looking at the schools that we had. What I didn't understand is that 70+% of the community knew it needed to improve its schools. The support was astronomically high. When I got elected into the school board, I realized my job is to make certain that we maintain these schools and we do a good job. And like Mr. Lee said, and my colleagues have commented on, it's a $40 million asset that's underutilized. We can't do that. It just is not a good idea. Unfortunately, I know there's a lot of history there. I understand there's a lot of pain in this whole process, but we simply can't do that. Every year I've sat here, our enrollment's gone down by 200 kids. Every year. Every year, every year, every year. The projections are not wrong. I wish they were. It'd make our jobs much easier up here, but the projections are not wrong. This whole process that Andreas highlighted for us, and anybody got any questions, I'll be more than willing to try to answer them or get him involved. This whole process is how this works. And we've got to go through this process, and it's going to be more complicated than it's already begun because we got a lot ahead of us. But I really believe this has to be done. This is a necessary part of the process. We can't have an asset that is not being utilized to its fullest capability. Dr. Delio works really diligently at keeping the adult ed as balanced as he possibly can. There's just not enough enrollment at Hamilton. That's why it's dropping. It's not because we elected not to offer classes. There's just, trust me, Dr. Delio would sell seats anywhere he could sell them. And like Mr. Lee said, and I've said repeatedly, it would be political suicide for us not to find a new location for the softball fields. You guys have done such a great job. We've been on the news, for God's sakes. So it would be foolish, it would be insane not to find another location. We just don't know where it's at yet. Bear with us. So, thank you. All right, back to where I started. I have a motion and a second for the adopted resolution. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving on to 11.3, something equally as complicated but not nearly as aware, is the Adopt Torrance Unified School District Resolution Number AS-04-18/19 for petition to initiate process for authorizing the transfer of territory from the Torrance Unified School District to the Palos Verdes Unified School District, each of Los Angeles County.
So moved.
Dr. Stowe.
Thank you, Mr. Wormers, members of the board. I'm here with David Soldani from Atkinson, Andelson, Lawyer, Rood, and Romo. He represented us in the negotiations and putting together these agreements. So a little bit of background. There's a piece of property that used to be in the city of Torrance where the Chandler Ranch property was, the quarry there on the southeast corner of the city, south of PCH and west of Narbonne. And a few years ago, the Rolling Hills Country Club developer bought that, and they've totally reconfigured that golf course, as well as a number of residents that they're building. When the city made a deal with the Chandler family, I believe, to change the boundaries of the city, giving some of the land to, or selling, I guess, some of the land to the city of Rolling Hills, or Rolling Hills Estates, the boundaries for the school district did not move, right? So the school district boundaries still are within the city of Rolling Hills Estates. And as the developer went along and built these homes or they haven't built but did the plot and built the golf course and now is in the process of selling and developing these homes. There are 29 of the 113 properties that lie within the Torrance Unified School District. And so we have a situation where the students who would live in those 29 homes would attend Torrance Unified, and the other students within that development would attend schools in the Palos Verdes Peninsula School District. And so we were approached by the developer to come to an agreement and ultimately change the boundary of the school district to allow students in those residences to then join the Palos Verdes School District. In return, we've negotiated a settlement for $7 million that you'll see in item 11.5. That's prorated on a per lot basis that we'll get paid, but we can go through that at that time. So there are three items here. This is a resolution authorizing the initiation for the transfer of territory from Torrance Unified to Palos Verdes Unified. And I will let Mr. Soldani speak specifically about some of the intricacies that exist there.
You've been here all night, jump in.
Thank you, it's good to be here, thanks for having me. Yes, those three items are related, and I'll kind of get into how. So first, we have this resolution and petition to initiate the transfer of that territory. That has to be jointly adopted, jointly meaning by both boards of Palos Verdes and Torrance, though not at the same time. So we're adopting our portion of that resolution tonight. Palos Verdes is going to do their portion at a later time. That was the trade-off in exchange for the payment from the developer, is that we would jointly submit this application so that you would have a development where all of the homes are essentially in the same school district. We think that makes a lot of sense, as does the developer. However, in order to offset that loss of ADA for those 29 homes and the students that would be generated from that forevermore, we settled on the dollar amount that we did, and Dr. Stowe did a great job of getting that amount from the developer. It's a significant amount, given the number of lots. So this first item we have really fulfills our end of the obligation, which is that we would submit a petition to the County Committee on School District Organization to transfer these 29 lots so that they move from our district into the neighboring district of Palos Verdes. Now, we don't control the end result of that process. We just have the power to make the request. Ultimately, that request is then transmitted on to the County Committee on School District Organization for Los Angeles County. And they'll have to hold a public hearing someplace within our district boundaries and within Palos Verdes district boundaries. There's a process that it follows, with it ultimately culminating in the transfer of those lots over into Palos Verdes. So this resolution is really the kickoff of the petition that we would send to the county committee. And once Palos Verdes adopts their portion of it, which I think it's slated to happen at their September meeting, that petition will get turned over to the county committee. Now, the second piece of that is a interdistrict transfer agreement. So we recognize that these lots will develop over time, and there may be some lots that are developed before the property is actually transferred, so they would technically still be in our district. So we wanted to make sure that as those lots are being completed, those students have an ability to go to Palos Verdes right from the get-go, so that you don't have a situation where you start out in one district and then a year later, now you move over to the other district when the territory transfer happens. So that's part two. That's the other agreement that's in front of you tonight. And lastly, the third agreement, that's the actual mitigation agreement itself, which sets forth the dollar amounts and spells out the obligations of both our district and Palos Verdes in terms of submitting this territory transfer application. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about any component of this.
Mrs. Reagans.
I just wanted to reiterate my comment from before, that to be fiscally responsible, we look at all of these things and how they sort of feed into the entire financial picture of the school district and make decisions that will be the most beneficial. Thanks.
Mr. President, one comment. What wasn't also delineated is there is the mitigation fee that will be paid. There's also $500,000 in developer fees that will be paid also to the district.
Oh, very good. It's actually, when I'm no longer sitting up here behind a dais, there's a really funny story about this whole thing transacted with Mr. Lee and Dr. Mannon and da-da-da-da. Maybe in 4 or 5 years when I'll be able to sit down and explain people. But it was quite the e-ticket ride for a while there, so.
They were happy to pay it.
Ultimately, they were. So, all in favor?
Aye.
11.4, approve the interdistrict transfer agreement between Torrance Unified School District and Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District.
So moved. So moved.
I got a second, and a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
11.5, approve school facilities funding and mitigation agreement between Chadmar/Coughlin Rolling Hills, Torrance Unified School District, and Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. 11.6, board review of board policy 5116.1 and board policy 6145.
There is no action that the board is required to do with this. These are the only 2 statutes that are required to be on a board agenda on an annual basis. But there is no requirement for the board to even discuss these.
And as I asked this morning, how did you know that? Because he was here when they changed the law. All those, do I have a motion and a second?
We don't need anything.
You don't do anything.
We don't even vote on it.
No. Just there.
There's no action.
Very good. We've now dropped to the consent agenda. Mr. Lee.
I'll make a motion to approve general consent items 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and that's it.
Does anybody want to pull anything from all of those consent items? Mr. Steff, Mrs. Reagans? Okay. Do I have a motion? You got a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we have now moved to the information part of our agenda. Got the board calendar, and you take a look at that on our website. And comments from members of the Board of Education. Let's start with Mr. Steffen. Do you have anything to say?
I think I've said enough.
That's not like you. Mrs. Reagans.
Actually, I have a couple of anniversaries of our classified employees that I wanted to recognize. 25 years of accredited service on the part of these employees. And actually, it's 2 folks who are here at the district office. One is Daniel Chen, who's in the copy center for us. Thank you, Daniel, for your great work in producing the written materials we need. And the other is Kay Peterson in IT. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lee.
I would like to have brought back on the next agenda an item excusing the absence for Martha Deutsch, if no one has a problem with that.
I do not.
Good.
Okay. I would normally talk about SoCal Rock, but we couldn't form a quorum for the month of August. So we are now moving to the month of September. We're looking for a meeting there. I'll take one more stab at this again. Thank you guys for on that committee. It was long and arduous, so thank you very, very much. I've been on a couple of committees that were similar. In fact, Linda Cessna asked me if I wanted to participate in the Strategic Plan Committee again, which I did 12, 13 years ago, and it was a nightmare. So I'm like, no! Anyhow, looking for a motion for an adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn in memoriam of retired high school teacher and actually my football coach, Howard Tall.
Oh, my condolences, Mr. Lee. A second? All those in favor? Aye. Don't run away. We have a special session.
Which will take...
This could take
You
hours.
can all run away if you want to go home.
Yeah, you can go home. This is really...
But you can stay.
I'd like to call to order the special session for the meeting of the Board of Education.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Discussion, action items, instructions to public speakers, et cetera, et cetera. I won't even, well, I mean, go ahead. Instruction to public speakers wishing to address the Board on Education topic items are submitted to 3 minutes per topic. Total time granted for public input is limited to 30 minutes per topic. Board policies require public presentation. The Board comply with certain procedures, including 235 listed oral communications. Nominations for membership on the Los Angeles County Committee on School District Organization. Do I have any nominations for this?
I'll nominate Mrs. Heidi Ashcraft.
Do I have any other nominations for this? So we have one nomination. All those in favor of that?
light on.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Reagan, I didn't even see it. Mrs. Reagan's. My apologies.
Yeah, I just wanted to recognize that Heidi is interested in participating in this committee, but for the last, how many years has it been, Dr. Mann? Do you even know?
40,
So for many years, our representative has been Owen Griffith, who is a wonderful paragon of our community and has served the school district on the school board for decades, and then has been on our personnel commission and has been on the county committee for us for a very long period of time and served us very ably. He's been a wonderful representative and has done us proud on that committee, and I want to thank him for that. But I do think, since we have someone who's enthusiastic about joining that committee and participating in the fun redistricting efforts that are going on in a number of school districts, that it may be time to pass the torch to someone new. So I will not enter Owen's name as a nomination, but thank you, Owen.
Again, my apologies for not seeing your light. We have Heidi Ashcraft is the nominated, and vote, or?
Aye.
Aye, aye. It's unanimous, all four?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's how politics is done.
Completed our task.